USDA administers several programs designed to deploy and commercialize biofuels production facilities, providing technical and financial support, which includes grants, loans, and loan guarantees. The President also acknowledged the disruptive impact of the global economic recession and recent volatilities in the commodity markets on the biofuels industry, and suggested that USDA work to begin restructuring existing investments in biofuels as needed to preserve the industry's employment. In April, at the Summit of the Americas, President Obama proposed that the democratically elected governments of the Western Hemisphere work together to form the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas. Recognizing the opportunities and challenges countries face in balancing their economic growth, energy, and environmental objectives, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas will strengthen cooperation in the Western Hemisphere on energy and climate change issues, enhance energy security, reduce global greenhouse gas emissions, and advance clean energy economic growth. The United States government has requested input from other governments so we may jointly develop the substance of the partnership, taking into account our unique needs, resources, and interests. We will listen and learn from the leaders across the Western Hemisphere regarding their ideas on energy and climate. I'm also pleased that USDA scientists are collaborating with their Brazilian counterparts under the U.S.-Brazil Biofuels Initiative to work together on advanced biofuels technologies. The U.S. and Brazil are also working on with governments in Central America and the Caribbean, and soon in Africa, to advance biofuels uptake there, and with the European Union and other countries to advance biofuels worldwide. Biofuels promise to play a key role in providing the United States and countries around the world with homegrown, substantial energy options and energizing countries' economies with industries and jobs. And the programs we are working with to enact at USDA will be a powerful engine to providing sources of bioenergy, economic growth, and will help to revitalize U.S. industries. Again, thank you to President Yank and UNICA for hosting me at this conference. You and your staff have been more than kind. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tonsager. What is important for us here in our country to understand from his speech now is there is, United States, a huge coordination taking in account the future of biofuels in that country. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. John Elkington, you have the floor.
Bom dia, good evening. Just that, thank you. Okay, no, I don't need that. I was being offered a laser point to silence you if you became difficult. It's a great pleasure to be here for the Ethanol Summit. I'd like to add my congratulations to UNICA and the other organizers. I'm going to give you a very personal perspective. It's a great privilege to be part of this panel of very distinguished speakers. I do feel a bit of an outsider. I'm not from the energy industry, I'm not from the biofuels sector, but I have worked for quite some time in the sustainability field. And my title, Ethanol versus Sustainability, is just to make the point that there are tensions between the growth of your industries and the sustainability of other systems. Let me just say a few things by way of introduction. I'm not going to go right the way through this slide, but just to make the point that in addition to the companies that I've founded and worked with, I'm on the boards or advisory boards of over 25 organizations around the world, which is far too many. But the reason I bring that up is when I look at the areas that these organizations cover, it's extremely broad. It's not just climate change or biodiversity or water. It's human rights, it's bribery and corruption, it's global governance. And I think when we talk about sustainability now, the agenda has become very much broader. And at the top there, you have two images, one of Bunker Roy, who some of you will know in India as the founder of Barefoot College. Very practical, very down to earth. And to his side is Jerry Lineker, who's another member of our advisory board at Volans. And Jerry is one of the two people, or a very small number of people, who've both been an astronaut, American astronaut, went up on 2 shuttle missions, and a cosmonaut. He was on the Russian Mir space station. And he came back absolutely transformed, absolutely determined to deal with, in particular, the water issue. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Our chairman, Rodrigo, mentioned the triple bottom line. People, planet, profit, it still, I think, has relevance, but many people still think of it as a balancing act. It's very complicated and very difficult to be dynamic if you're playing that balancing game. But increasingly, I think it is being seen, or needs to be seen, as the sort of almost the genetic code of the 21st century economy. And some of the organizations that we work with, one shown here, the Dow Jones Sustainability Indexes, track companies, track value chains on the basis of their capacity to deal with these multiple dimensions of value creation. And the biofuels industry is problematic for those who operate within it, because many of us outside the biofuel sector find it very difficult to distinguish between the different sources, technologies, actors in this increasingly global business. Shown here is palm oil. I've worked in Malaysia, and I remember the first time I went to Kuala Lumpur, the whole region was covered in smoke coming from Indonesia. A lot of that smoke was coming from forests being burnt down to plant oil palm. So Malaysia was running a reasonably sustainable oil palm sector, partly for biofuels, or increasingly for biofuels. But the regional implications were profound. And many campaigners, many people in the media, when they think about biofuels and bioenergy, think about this much larger context. It's also important to think about, as part of that context, the pressure waves that have hit one sector of industry after another, and I think have really, despite the recent pressure on biofuels in relation to the potential collision with food production, I don't think the pressure on the bioenergy sector has yet built as it increasingly will do, I believe. We've seen these pressure waves being expressed in places like the World Economic Forum, shown here. We've tried to map them. This is very much a northern or OECD view, but there have been 3 big waves to date. Let me just quickly show you their characteristics. The first wave that peaked 69 to 73 in the United States, and BP's move into Alaska exactly coincided with that. The introduction of, for example, environmental impact assessment regulations. Through much of that time, with some rare exceptions, business was on the defensive, being forced to do things it didn't want to do. The second wave, distinctly different. A bit of green competition for a few years, and then it defaulted. It dropped back to corporate citizenship. Nothing wrong with citizenship, but it's not sustainability. The third wave, which really started in the streets of Seattle in 1999 with the protests against the World Trade Organization, focused on globalization, and particularly the anti-globalization agenda, and 2 forms of governance, global governance and corporate governance. Now, all of these agendas continue, although that particular wave was smashed back by the events of 9/11 in 2001. We believe that there is a very different wave building now, quite distinct from the ones that have gone before, very much more focused on entrepreneurial, innovative solutions at scale to some of the big challenges that sort of cluster under the sustainability heading. So solutions to poverty, to pandemic risks, to energy access and security, climate issues, and many other areas. And I hope either today or tomorrow there will be a very recent report that we've produced on the subject, which I hope you will have an opportunity to look at. But when we look out now at the landscape of innovation, we're interested in what big companies are doing, the Petrobrases, the BPs and others out there. But increasingly, I think this fourth wave environment is focusing on very different people, innovators, entrepreneurs, venture capitalists. No accident in a way, perhaps, that's where Lord Browne now spends much of his time. And shown here, Shai Agassi. Some of you will know of his work on battery vehicles and converting both countries and cities, so Israel, Australia, Denmark, the states of California and Hawaii, the city of Toronto, to electric-powered vehicles. Why is that significant? Well, because if it takes off, it will, to some degree, constrain the market for biofuels. But it's also an interesting example, I think, of how new business models, in this case from the cell phone industry, are being cross-applied with potentially considerable impact to new sectors. And another organization that is covered in that report is the Global Footprint Network. And I mention them because they're having a very, very powerful effect on how people see the sustainability agenda. So we all know about ecological footprinting, I imagine, and the fact that in the early 1980s, the human species crossed the line in terms of, almost went into ecological bankruptcy, and that has accelerated. This diagram put together by the Global Footprint Network suggests that last year we were using 140% of the Earth's available resources. What's interesting, though, with the Global Footprint Network is they're now working very closely with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And increasingly, I think this style of thinking will start to permeate what big companies do in this sort of space. Let me very quickly run you around a quick logic loop that we thank you very much. Obrigado. When these sorts of issues come up and hit, they maybe hit products or technologies or companies or value chains or industries or entire national economies, very often it hits actors of these sorts initially in the brand. And this was just an image I scooped off the internet the other day, which was BP's logo being mashed up with an image from the Vietnam War. It's very easy to damage or at least attack or challenge brands these days. Once that starts to happen, once the pressure, and that can happen at the level of a national brand, or it can happen at the level of an industry brand, say bioenergy in Brazil, what you start to see is pressure starting to develop through supply chains. The example Lee Scott, shown here, cascading his new concerns and priorities through Walmart's supply chain. 61,000 vendors around the world is an example of that. Eventually, all of this comes up to board level, into the realm of corporate priority setting and governance. Shown here is Peter Brabeck-Letmathe, who was chairman of Nestlé, was CEO of Nestlé, now their chairman. An example of a company that's been under pressure for a very long time and is now beginning to realize that this is structural, this is strategic, this is something that they're going to have to deal with as a company right at the very top. And he's recently set up a advisory board of people like Michael Porter, Jeffrey Sachs, C.K. Prahalad to help him think through all of that. So it's coming up to board level. But even more fundamentally, it is now about business models. And it's interesting to see people like Goldman Sachs, not just the socially responsible investment, smaller players, starting to focus on value creation in this space, trying to understand the business models, tracking them over time. Then just a final point, that in the end, after you've gone through all of those, you come back into the branding space. And the reason why I put General Electric here and Jeff Immelt, their CEO, is because of their Eco-Imagination initiative, which has been astonishingly effective in terms